Hi, folks. I'm Dan Dworkis, and this is the Emergency Mind Podcast, a space where we bring together lessons from the emergency department and beyond about performing at our best when it matters the most and applying knowledge under pressure. I'm super psyched for this conversation today. We've been going back and forth a lot about it, and I'm just delighted to have Jon Becker on the podcast. Jon has spent the last 4 decades working to protect law enforcement and military operators. He's the founder and CEO of Aardvark Tactical, a leading provider of tactical equipment and custom solutions, and of Project 7, an armor manufacturer. If that's not enough, he's also founded a real estate holding company and is a licensed attorney in California. Jon is the host of the Debrief Podcast, which is how I met him and why he has that really snazzy looking debrief sign behind him, which totally eclipses my kitchen that you're looking at behind me. I was lucky enough to click in with Jon on the Debrief Podcast and through some other work we've done as well. And I have just constantly been amazed what Jon does to connect teams to each other and to think through the underlying issues that affect all of us. So Jon, thank you for coming on the podcast, man. Delighted to have you.
I'm excited to be here, Dan. I always enjoy our conversations.
Totally. And I will say also, you and I are, this is the only conversation I've had with a guest ahead of time where we debated whether or not he had to wear a shirt. So I'm thankful that you're wearing a shirt on this podcast. If you're watching the video, if you're not, you're going to have to take my word for it that Jon is wearing a shirt. So again, let's go for whatever that takes us. Jon, so where you are right now in the middle of operating both on the production side of tactical gear and then on the cultural side of helping teams figure out who they are and how to operate in a different way is just phenomenally interesting. It's also really far away from what your, in large quotes, like technical training is in. Can you take me through that? What is it that got you to be the host of the Debrief and to really get really stuck in with a lot of these teams?
So you got to go back to, at 17, I leave high school, go to college, and I start a rock climbing company called Aardvark Enterprises. And we're selling rock climbing equipment, ropes, carabiners, those kinds of things. And I started to deal with SWAT teams and spec ops groups who are buying stuff. Meantime, I'm going through college, finishing college. As I'm getting out of college, I'm dealing more and more with LA sheriffs, LAPD, the LA FBI office, and I'm meeting guys who are really the movers and shakers in the tactical community. Like they are the OGs of the tactical community. And they would always say, hey, can you get us this kind of gear? I don't know anything about that. Oh, we're doing some training. Dude, come down and hang out with us. And so my rule was I would never turn down free training. By the time I'm 25 and getting out of law school, I've got 3,000 hours of special tactics training. And it just turns out that Babe Ruth taught me to hit baseballs. Fred Astaire taught me to dance. I always say when I teach this, there's 2 origin stories for Jon Becker. One is a really cool Tony Stark, Iron Man, business genius story. And the other is tactical Forrest Gump. I would love to say it's the first one. It's really the second one. I've been in the right place at the right time with amazing people my whole career. And so when I go to law school, my last 2 years of law school, I work LAPD police litigation as an intern, which is when the Rodney King case is happening and law enforcement litigation is taking off. And as the business starts to grow, we start doing military stuff, pass the bar, realize I really don't want to be an attorney. I don't know a lot of happy attorneys. The business is not quite making as much money as I will as a lawyer, but I'm having a lot more fun. And I've been immersed in this community now for 39 years. And in the process have met amazing people who have just exposed me to tremendous opportunities. And so I feel a great deal of obligation to my end user to do everything I can to keep them safe. And if you look at everything I do in my career, it really is about keeping the men and women on the front line of war on terror, war on crime, however you want to describe it, the people that put themselves in harm's way on our behalf. My job is to keep them safe.
Love it, man. We'll have to translate who Babe Ruth and Fred Astaire is for our Gen Z listeners.
Yeah. I learned to drive from Lewis Hamilton and Taylor Swift taught me to play guitar.
Perfect. Just kidding. I'm sure everybody knows who all those people are. But I love that because it embedded in that story is the conversation around the superpower of observing and the superpower of being present, right? Because there's lots of people that probably have been exposed to some facets of what you're talking about through one version or another. But to go from the leap of being like, oh, hey, I'm a casual observer or an interloper that gets to hang out on a weekend or something, to being somebody that says, hey, I'm seeing this over here and I'm seeing that over there. And maybe there's a line that connects these dots that'd be helpful for you all to talk to each other, to think through it, right? To be a dedicated observer like that is like a truly interesting thing. How did you start with that? Like, where do you think that came from?
I could probably trace that back to one experience, actually. Interestingly, one of my primary mentors was a guy named Sid Hale. Sid and I were friends for 35 years. He's since died, but he was one of my primary mentors. And we brought him in to teach a flashbang class, a tactical class, to a bunch of cops. And he finished the class. And this is back when they were overheads, before we had
Sure.
PowerPoint and you used to make overhead slides. And a guy came up and said, "Hey, sir, do you mind if I copy your slides?" And Sid handed him the slides, said, "Yeah, go find a copy machine and bring it back to me." And I looked at him and I said, it's taken you years to build that curriculum. That's your
Mm.
intellectual property. And he said, you never hoard information. If you have the ability to help, you have a responsibility to help. And if this guy goes and teaches somebody else that doesn't get killed, then my work has made a difference in a way I'll never even know. So don't ever hoard information. And it resonated at the time, but now looking back on it, I realize how profound it was. Much like your line of work, hoarding information decreases the likelihood of other people. If you know some magic new ER technique and you don't
Sure.
share it with other doctors, you probably at some point cost somebody their lives. And I think that that was really the triggering moment for me,
Mm.
that when I'm in a position where I have information that will help other people, I have an obligation to share it with those people. And it's just because we deal with so many different teams, because we operate in military, federal, and state and local law enforcement, I've always been in a position where I'm dealing with somebody who solves something that somebody else doesn't know how to solve.
Mhm.
And my role has always been to bring the teams new technologies and new ways to solve their problems. And so it's just developed as part of the culture of our organization that my job is bring you information. And that's also part of the origin story for the podcast.
So what's so interesting about that to me is that's like not the course that most teams tend to take. And I know there are parallels about this in the military, but I'm just going to talk about medicine for a second because it's obviously what I know best. But there are lots and lots of smart doctors and nurses in the hospitals, right? You don't get to be there by being an idiot most of the time. And what we have, though, is a culture that's based on silos and based on differences, right? What the big culture is in the hospital is, well, the medicine doctors do this, the surgeons do this, the ER doctors are over here. And you see the wedges being driven in to drive those culture sets apart. And there are rare opportunities for people to cross that line and work together. And sometimes that's forced, right? Like trauma teams, for example, in the ER are a mix of surgical culture and emergency culture because trauma emergency really requires both of those sets of skills to really operate. You throw in a pediatric trauma or a trauma in an obstetric patient who's pregnant, right? Like you get all these other cultures that sort of crash into each other at this moment of impact. But most of the time, the cultures, the tribes, for lack of a better word, exist in parallel lives in the hospital. And that traces all the way back to the way that we're taught in medical school. And I assume that there's a lot of parallels to this in the way they're taught in nursing school and everything else. But you have more of this sense of you define yourself by differences. You define yourself by the tribes that you're not. And you find the people that like the same jokes that you do. And our mutual friend Preston Klein says, cheat and steal the same way that you cheat and steal, which is an interesting way to describe that. But
It's a very clear way to describe it.
right, like you find the people where you fit in. And part of that is a push against the other sets of culture. But what you're describing is a very different vision, is in
Yeah.
some sense a vision of, hey, we're going to look for the connections, we're going to look for the commonalities, and we're going to drastically increase the opportunities for these teams to operate, maybe not with each other, but parallel and in connection to each other. Talk to me about that. What's that? Do you have to convince people for that? Is there
No.
ways to do that?
So it's a very interesting observation on your part. I think that part of it is the way people are trained, the way people are brought up. If you think of the guys that mentored me when SWAT started, which is really SWAT starts post the 1972 Munich Olympics, right? LAPD had a team 1 year before that, but like the whole modern notion of a SWAT team and of hostage rescue starts in Munich, where Israeli athletes are taken hostage. The German police do not have a response. There is no such thing as a SWAT team. They don't have a counterterrorism team. And it doesn't go well. It's a catastrophic failure. And not
Absolutely.
because they didn't try, they just didn't know what to do. Then 12 years later, the Olympics are coming to LA. And so the SWAT teams that have formed in the United States are now preparing for the 84 Olympics and trying to figure out how to solve these problems. And they are the pioneers. These guys don't, I interviewed a guy named Mike Hillman, who was one of the original members of LAPD's team. And Mike said, one of our concerns is they were going to take athletes and put them on a bus like they did in Munich. So we had to figure out, like, how do you attack a bus? There was no doctrine. We had to make it up and figure it out. And so there was this very collaborative environment where LAPD and LA Sheriff and FBI and the FBI hostage rescue team are trying to figure out how to solve the problem. So think like very early medicine. You're not yet to a point that people have had an opportunity to silo themselves because nobody has enough knowledge to profit from it. And I think the advantage there is they're working together to solve the problem. And if I find something, then man, I think early medicine, right? Like the first guy that ever, I don't know, stopped somebody from choking. I always use the example of a rattlesnake, and you and I have laughed about this, but the first guy that found a rattlesnake got bit by a rattlesnake. If he didn't tell the second guy who found a rattlesnake, he also got bit. And that happened until somebody came back and said, hey, long skinny thing, rattles on the tails, fangs on the front, don't touch it. And then theoretically, nobody got bit after that. And I think that because of the nature of the teams that I'm dealing with, the problems that they're trying to solve, they're very focused on keeping each other alive. And that is a little more important than monetizing the information is.
Sure.
There isn't a formal, there's not, in the case of medical school, there's a lot of medical schools and they're very expensive. And it is more of an industry, I think, than where I grew up. So from where I grew up, the mindset is like, you share information, you help each other solve problems. And it's also a little bit my nature.
Sure.
So if you tell me something really cool that I know can help somebody else, then I want to tell them that.
Yeah.
And I think it also informs my view of leadership, is that your role as a leader is to get the right answer. It's not to have it. We are responsible. I am responsible for running my organization. And what that means is that I need to harness 100% of the brain power of the people that work for me. So we're very collaborative by nature. I know that the person that knows most about sewing in our organization is somebody who sews, and I'm probably the person that knows the least. So my job is to get the right answer. So many young leaders want to be the guy with the right answer. Oh, yeah, I thought of this. I came up with this. I know how to solve this problem. I think the older you get, and I think you feel the same way. I'm sure if you're working in an ER case and a nurse has a good idea, you're like, man, good idea. Thanks for that.
100%.
Like every doctor has a story where a nurse saved him.
Many stories, many stories.
But there are also doctors who didn't listen to that nurse and made the mistake. And I think I don't want to be the one who let his ego stand in the way of getting to the right answer. I want to be the one that listens to the people that I'm working with. And so when I teach culture-centric leadership, that's a lot of the focus is your job is to find the right answer, not to be the guy that has it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Because I don't think that the siloism and separatism in medicine comes from a place of money, in large part because the way that any money happens through the healthcare system is so wildly complicated. It doesn't really have anything to do with the way that teams are built on like a day-to-day basis. There might be truth in that if you're talking about two different surgeons in the same town and they're developing new techniques and whatever. But I think most of the time when you're talking about acute, unplanned care, read chaos, right? Like emergencies and trauma and everything else, like it doesn't really have anything to do with us. And that's actually why most of us select that course, because we don't actually want to think about any of that. We just want to show up and do the work and help people. And still there's this separatism and unnecessary barriers that come in there. And I think you said something in there, which is it's some version of like, it's how we're trained. And I think that's a lot of it, which is what are you taught? What models are you taught about what right looks like? What are you supposed to be thinking about? Right. And what you said about leaders value getting to the solution, not having the solution is a great example of one mode of teaching things. Right. So my question off of this is, when you've looked at the different teams you've worked with, or when you reflect on your own team for the companies that you built, like how do you select and train people to have that attitude of the mission's the most important, collaboration is the way to do it? We had a guest on a podcast recently, Paul Hughes, former special operator from the UK, who's done a lot of work in military intelligence. And he talks a lot about the superpower of being the glue for a team. That's what he loves to do. He loves to be the glue for the team. So how do you select people for that? How do you train them for that?
It's interesting because I spend a lot of time thinking about selection, right? And if you look at the units that we work with and the units that I'm working with, the units that we're working with, selection is an ever increasingly important topic, because I think now, almost 40 years into running a business, I realize there are certain skills that I can teach you. There are things that I interviewed a guy just recently, the episode that came out yesterday is a guy named John Dowd. And John's job is to help elite units pick their teams. He helps with selection and assessment. And one of the things he said is there are certain skills that you have to buy and certain skills you can build. So I can't make you a 6-minute a mile runner. I can take you from 6:15 to 6 minutes. Sure, I can train that. But if you're running 12-minute miles, you're probably not going to run a 4-minute mile, like ever. So I think that innate culture, like the innate team ability of people, Rich Davini, the author of the Attributes, talks about it in the form of team ability. I think team ability, the ability to get along, is an innate skill. And I think that we can polish it and we can help it and we can encourage it and put you in an environment. But I think that if you are a solitary operator who doesn't value the opinions of other people, it is going to be very difficult for me to get you there. So when we run selection, as we're hiring people, I'm looking more at who you are, your culture. Your skills in our industry, I can teach you the skills. I can't teach you to be a good player. I can't teach you to get along with the team. And so the way that I screen for that is I'm going to have you talk to a variety of different personalities. And some of the people you're going to talk to, you're not going to realize are part of that screening process. So you may be interviewed by, if you're coming in a high important role, I'm going to probably have a 22 or 23-year-old female sit down and talk to you while you're waiting for the interview. And if you treat her like crap, she's going to throw you off the island. We really have a survivor mindset that no one person will bring you into the organization, but anyone can take you out. And that's because I think I've learned that really above everything else, I can't teach you integrity and I can't teach you to care about people. And that's really what I'm looking for when I'm hiring. And when you look at the elite teams that we're working with, that's what they're looking at. They're looking at, are you humble? Do you learn from other people? Do you engage with other people? Do you care about the team? So I think it's really hiring for culture rather than hiring for skills. And I've made the mistake, man. I just wrote an article recently for Entrepreneurial called Don't Hire a High-Performing Asshole. And it was all about mistakes that I've made, hiring people like, oh, this is the best sales guy in the country. Yeah, but he's a terrible person. Yeah, but God, he's going to really help the business. And I've learned you don't hire for that.
Yeah. And implicit in that, again, is this idea that you're going to take into account the opinion of everybody on your team, right?
Yes.
Because you have already decided as a leader, hey, like, not really consensus is important, because it doesn't have to be consensus, but it does have to be a spread of viewpoints. And it's implicit in that, the idea that my viewpoint is not enough to run everything, right? You might get the ultimate say, but that doesn't mean that your viewpoint is everything. And I think that's a hard challenge for leaders to step into, because in some sense, we're asking them to do two things at some point in their career, right? And this is the leader of teams or leader of emergency teams or whatever it is, right? Like, you're starting to step into your own, you're starting to be able to deliver command and control, to shape the field, and then also to do it in a way that understands you're imperfect, you're practicing an art imperfectly, and that you need the rest of the team around you to actually accomplish something. And I think that's one of the more delicate transitions we ask people to make, because it is a step forward and a step back at the same time.
It's interesting because I don't see it as a step forward and a step back. And it's interesting because as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, especially as a young doctor, right? You're the doctor, right? They're going to refer to you as doctor, not as Dan, you're doctor, right? You're the pilot of the ship, right? So there's a lot of responsibility implicit in that. And yeah, he's the one that's in charge. If you think of it from the terms that people talk about, the OODA loop: observation, orientation, decision, and action. As a leader, really your job is to make the decision, right? We're supposed to make decisions. And I always say, if two things walk in my door, cookies and turds, by the time they make it to my desk, there's no cookies left, because everybody's eating the cookies and the turds get passed up. And the farther up the organizational chain you are, the bigger the turd is. And so your job is to figure out what to do with it. And I think that it's a fool's errand to think that making the decision, or the ability, being the person who has the ability to make the decision, means you have the most information about the decision. Our mutual friend Kevin Sear talks a lot about that. This idea that I want to get information from the person who has ground truth. I want the guy who knows the most about this thing. You might have a pulmonary case in the ER, and as an ER doc, you have quite a bit of experience, but you're going to turn to a pulmonologist.
Sure.
Because if it's really complicated, he's the guy, right? That's true in every organization. And the closer to the ground the problem is, the closer to the ground you need to get for the information. And so I don't see the two as mutually exclusive. I see
Yeah.
my responsibility to make the decision doesn't mean I have to be the guy that has information. It means I have to be the guy that gathers it.
So a really unique challenge that ER doctors in particular face is that we're on both sides of that equation,
Yeah.
right? So like when we're in the ER and somebody has a heart attack, we're going to do the first step, but then we're going to call in a team, a cardiology based team, to take that person to the cath lab and open up that artery. At the same time, later on, if that person suffers a cardiac arrest somewhere else in the hospital, that floor is going to call on us to come out of the ER, go up and respond and run that cardiac arrest. Right. So it's one of the few teams that has both of those sets of the equations in it. Right. You'd think that would, well, I was about to say you'd think that would make us better at it. And I'm sure it does in some ways. But I think more than that, it exposes to us the shape of that problem because you're seeing it from multiple directions. Right. And you realize how challenging it is to be both the first in that's attempting to solve the problem and then calling in support. And then also the support that's coming in into an unstable situation and trying to navigate your way through it and make it happen. I don't have a question on that. I just think that's a fascinating thing that we dig into and think of all the time.
And it's like, if you contrast that against, say, a surgeon who is brought in by another physician to solve a problem, he does his job and he's done, right? Let's take an orthopedic surgeon. He's not going to do the rehab, right? He's going to check on you, going to make sure you're okay, make sure there isn't complications from surgery, but his problem is a very discrete beginning and end.
Sure.
Your problem doesn't have that discrete beginning and end, technically when they show up at the hospital and when they leave, but like your problem, and I think that's part of the reason that you have the mind that you do, is like you look at guys that are attracted to and ER docs are like the door kickers of the tactical world. Like you like uncertainty. You go looking, you look for trouble, right? That's why you become an ER doc, is you go looking for situations that are ambiguous and confusing and chaotic and stressful, and you want to be thrown in there and you're going to be the guy. But you also realize in that job that there are a lot of supporting things around you that are going to help you. And I think that kind of also runs in the entrepreneur mindset. I think one of the differences between founders in a business and runners of a business, just in talking to people, is founders of the business. I've literally done every job in the building at some point, right? Like when it was my wife and I 35 years ago trying to do this, we were doing everything. And so I recognize I'm really not good at computer networking hardware anymore. So thank God I have an expert in that I can turn
Sure.
to. And whereas if you come in at the top of an organization, if you're put into leadership too early, I think that you start to believe that leadership is a position, not a responsibility. And it's a very different mindset to see yourself as a guy who's making the decision. I get to make the decision versus I have to make the decision. And everybody below me is relying on me making that decision right. And that's a great deal of responsibility, and I don't want to screw it up.
So there's a couple threads here that I'm going to see if maybe we connect, right? So we're thinking about what does it take to develop people who are able to be collaborative, who are not checked in by ego, who want to be better, but are super interested in learning what other folks have already learned and grown from, right? And a couple of the threads that we've picked up for that are, one, what is the model that they're taught? Are they taught a model where they're the head honcho, or are they taught a model where their team is what's important and figuring out the details of that is what's important? We talked about what you just said about entrepreneurs, about do you understand your limitations? And that could be the limitation of you don't have the only viewpoint, or it could be the limitation of, look, I'm good here. I'm not that great over here. I need an expert to come in and fix this part. We also talked a bit implicitly about the importance of creating what is essentially neutral ground to talk to other teams, right? Which is part of the space that you occupy with the debrief and I occupy with the emergency mind, right? And we occupy with mission critical, which is that we're not directly part of it. We're just adjacent to it.
Yeah.
And having a space there where people can collaborate and talk, and maybe it's not quite so barriers up as it would be in the hospital or on the range or whatever it is, right? So we've got, how do we teach them? We've got, do they understand their own limitations? And we've got some version of creating neutral ground. What's missing from that soup, for lack of a better word?
I don't know that anything's missing from that soup. I'll tell you what ties it all together. So one of the things I had somebody ask me years ago in an interview, what's the difference between really elite teams and teams that are not so good? Because you deal with thousands of SWAT teams, you have all this experience. Like, what makes a really good SWAT team versus one that's not that good? And I said, I will tell you the difference in my experience in interacting with them is the teams that are not that good are usually the most egotistical and they're usually the most impressed with themselves. And the teams that are literally the top units in the world are the ones that every time I have dinner with them, I'm exhausted when I'm done because they've emptied my brain. How do you solve this? How would you think about just the interactions that you and I have?
Sure.
Our conversations are exhausting because we're both trying to steal everything else in the other guy's brain. And I think that's rooted in humility. It's rooted in you can't learn if you are not humble.
Mm.
And so if you give me one personality trait for a person, for a team, for whatever, give me humility because that guy will learn from everybody. He will harvest the 100% of the brains available to him. If you go, here's a team of 100 people, he will harvest all 100 brains. If you go, here's one other guy to work with, he'll harvest that one brain. And his likelihood of making a correct decision, his likelihood of discovering hidden variables is so much higher because of this aspect of humility and the recognition that you're not special. Like I literally wrote an article called "You're Not Special," and it was all about leadership. And this was the idea: you're not special. You have a job, and that's an important job, right? Like the CEO of a company is an important job, but really, I can't do any of it without other people.
Sure.
So I'm the least important person in the room.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. What have you seen from, like, along that vein, what have you seen from teams in terms of how they teach that or how they make that part of their ethos? Or is this maybe this is a buy or build question, right? Or is this folks selected onto that team who have that innate capability? But maybe you're listening to this and let's say you're not on a team that looks like that. You're like, wow, I want to be part of a team that's like that. What have you seen that works in terms of nudging the culture around you?
It is all about culture. It is all about culture, and culture is set by the top of the organization.
Hmm.
So I've watched teams that are very good and very humble have new leadership that is self-centered, egotistical, and doesn't listen to anybody, and you can watch the culture erode. I've also watched teams that struggled and got the right leader who was harvesting everybody's brains. And part of it is our ability as leaders to celebrate everybody. Everybody in the organization matters. You cannot allow people to be siloed off of one another. So we're tribal, right? Like we're tribal monkeys. That's what we are. Like we'll find things that we're in common with, but then I'll hate you because I don't like which sports team you have. We'll find differentiators. And I think that a big thing that you see in teams that work effectively is they look for connectors, not for differentiators. And there is an ethos of humility and an ethos of learning. We are going to get better. Is this in the Japanese Toyota called it Kaizen, right? This idea of small beneficial changes. We're going to make small changes that will make us better. And every day we're going to get a little better than we were yesterday. And there is never a point that we're going to be homeostatic, right? It's like exercise, it's weight loss, whatever. You're never homeostatic. You're getting better, you're getting worse every day. And that's true of every person in the organization, and it's true of the organization. And so if the leader's focus is on, hey, go out and learn as much as you can and bring it back and share it with the team. And let's re-examine what we're doing constantly. The most elite units in the world send their guys to training from teams that are 2 steps down in the hierarchy from them. And their job is to bring something back, right? Our tier 1 units, our best units in the United States and the best units in Europe will say, hey, Dan, I want you to go over here to this tactical emergency medicine conference and you're going to fly over and I want you to bring back something to the team. And your one responsibility when you come back is to brief the team on what you found that you don't currently have. And as a result, your job is to teach. And nothing humbles you as from teaching. Nothing humbles you like teaching. So it's this culture of go out, get better, bring it back, and share it. The worst thing you can do in an organization like that is keep a secret. It's disgraceful to do. And that culture informs the entire organization constantly getting better.
I love that idea of looking for connectors, not detractors. I love that idea of getting in there and returning to your home team with lessons learned, right? I love it when it comes from the top and it's structured and, hey, this is what we're going to do. How do you build it from the bottom? Because I feel like a lot of folks that are listening to this that I talk to, that I work with, are not on teams that are necessarily shaped like that, right? But that doesn't mean they don't have control over their local microenvironment. It doesn't mean that they can't do things about it. It's a little bit too defeatist to be like, my leader doesn't do this way, so we're just not going to learn anything.
It's a very interesting point you make. I think that we have this kind of notion, again, that leadership is a position, right? Dan's in charge of the shift. And that's not true. It's not true. Leadership is a practice that human beings engage in all day, every day. It's one of the things that separates us from other animals, is this ability. It's funny because there's this notion of the alpha wolf, right? Like this for years, there's been this, oh, the alpha wolf, he's in charge. If you really look at the way a wolf pack happens, that's not true. There may be one in charge, but he's not the one that's always leading. And there's this idea of situational responsibility. As parents, as human beings, we're constantly leading and we're constantly following. And we need to learn to focus on that and recognize that if there's two of you working by yourself at night, you are leading and following each other constantly. And you have a responsibility to everybody that you work with to be the best leader and the best follower you can. If you are the most knowledgeable person, or you are the person that tasked with the responsibility to make the decision, you need to lead well. If not, you need to follow well. And it's one of the problems I think that we have as a country right now is this notion that the people above me are idiots. So, nothing's going to change. Everything's going to suck. I give up. No, make right now, this day, this shift, this hour, the best you can make it. Help each other as much as you can. What's interesting about that kind of a cultural shift is leaders have the responsibility to set in the culture, right? And leaders have the most effect on the culture. The way that a leader acts impacts the culture dramatically. But one of the things that evicts leaders is that the people in the organization are no longer willing to follow them because they've established a better culture, right? One of the unique things about pirates is they were very democratic. And even if you were the captain of the ship and the pirates on the ship decided that Dan had to go, Dan was given a choice. We're going to drop you off somewhere or we're going to kill you. Marooned as a notion is Dan is a terrible captain. What Dan's supposed to do when the pirates come to Dan, they go, hey, Dan, you're no longer the captain of the ship. Jim is the captain of the ship. Dan's supposed to go, roger that. I understand. Stepping down. If Dan goes, I'm the captain, I'm in charge, Dan's going to end up on a desert island somewhere, right? Yes, he's the guy that makes the decisions when decisions have to be made, but the organization sets the culture. And it's this weird balance between the leader and the people in the organization. And so if you are a lower level leader, and I don't care if you are the night janitor at a sports stadium, you affect culture by how good a job you do. You affect culture by the way you treat the people you work with. You affect culture by how much you care about the organization. And if everybody cares, the culture has a way of straightening itself out.
I love that. There's so much in there. We talk all the time about this concept of swarm teams, of these self-assembling groups that come together to solve like a cardiac arrest problem. And one of the really interesting things about them is that they don't typically know each other ahead of time.
Yeah.
Right. The people that respond to that. So there's this challenge of like, where and when do you make cultural changes when the team doesn't exist all the time? And there's so much in there of what you're saying that is in some sense an answer to that, right? Because if the team doesn't exist as a whole unit, then you make changes beforehand. You make changes when for individual people as they're choosing their things differently, how you talk about that assignment, what you go about as you build that space for it. So there's a lot of wisdom in that, man. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
If you are training me as whatever, I'm a nurse and you're training me how I'm going to respond to a swarm team. If what you're teaching me is that I'm going in and I'm being a servant to everybody else in that room and doing the best I can to support everyone else in that room, that is a very different thing than if you're telling me you got to go in there and straighten them out.
That's very funny. Like, I think, oh, please.
Especially as doctors, right? You're expected to go in there and you are in charge, but the way you treat the other people sets the culture for that moment, right? What makes teams is common purpose. If you're driving down the street and you see a lady with a broken down car and she's trying to push the car and a guy gets out and helps her and you get out and help him, you're a team. And your common objective of getting her to a gas station or getting her to a safe spot makes you a team. Now, if one of you goes to the front of the car and one of you goes to the back of the car and you push towards each other, you're not a team anymore.
Sure.
And so a lot of it is that all of the members of the team understand the common purpose and understand their role in that common purpose that allows them to become cohesive as a unit. And that might only be for an hour and they may dissolve, but it is this common cultural understanding that is set by the way they are originally trained. When you're teaching swarm team as a tactic, what you're teaching is this is how we collaborate. Now, if you go, hey, man, the doctor's in charge, the rest of you just do what he says, that's a very different thing. That's each of us has a role, and each of our roles is important in supporting the outcome. Here is our common purpose. This is how we work together. It feels different, and people act different.
Absolutely. One of the things we teach for the ER doctors who carry most of the gear with them when they run in, they're usually not the first ones in, right? So there's something usually going on by the time they reach there. And on paper, or at least structurally, they're then supposed to take over the room. At least that's how it works in theory. And one of the things I've always taught them to do is to hit that room and say, I'm ER, who's in charge?
Nice.
And sometimes people will be like, I'm in charge, in which case the answer is, I'm ER, what do you need? Like, I have your back, here are my skills, what helps? If nobody says anything, then next thing is, I am now in charge, this is what has to happen. Right? But you give the room that chance to say, hey, we don't need you to take over. We just need you to do airway. Or what we really need is IV access that nobody else can get. Or we don't even understand what we need. Help us organize. And like whatever you walk into like that, it allows you to frame shift and adjust and not use a one size fits all thing. But it's great to see the junior doctors start that process and understand, like you said, the humility and also the strength that comes with running in a room and being like, what do you need? Like, we're here. What is it that you need?
So it does two things, though. Doesn't it? One, it's instantly an act of submission. I'm ER. I'm here to help. That's an act of submission. Who is in charge? That's different than I'm in charge. Who's doing what?
Sure.
How can I help? The other thing is, it's a different communicative style. And I always use the example of if you and your wife are in an argument and you're sitting across the table and you're pointing your finger at her while you're talking to her, you will not win the argument no matter what you do, because you've instantly made her defensive, because it's you versus me. So one of the things I always try and do in my communication style is if we have a problem, it's you and I solving the problem.
Yeah, totally.
And that's also what that says. When you run in and you go, I'm ER, who's in charge, you're saying, I'm here to help. We have a common problem. And you're building the alliance simply with that first act of humility. And now they're going to go, oh man, this guy's here. He's here to help us. It's not, oh, he's in charge. Everybody defer to him. How can I help? And how you can help might be, hey man, you're the doctor. What the hell do we do here?
Sure.
Great. Step into that role. But like you said, it may be, can you just manage the airway? Yep. On it. It's
Absolutely.
it's a different communication style. And it's this immediate act of humility that I think puts you in a mindset of, instead of me sitting across the table, pointing my finger at you, I come to your side of the table, put my arm around you and go, how are we going to solve this?
Yeah, man. Love it. And amazingly, we're nearing the end of our time here for this. Before I turn it loose to you to issue a challenge for everybody, I actually want to ask you, what am I not asking you that I should? I've never asked this on a podcast before. I'm just genuinely curious what you come up with. Like, when you're looking at all the stuff we've talked about, what am I not digging into that from your vantage point I should be?
I think I love your show, but I think that the biggest thing that we culturally need to do is to focus on culture and focus on the realization that is what drives our behavior. And so I think that really, I think the direction we went was a really good direction, but I think that it's getting people, we talk about issuing a challenge, is like getting people to look at their culture. Your culture is a reputation, right? You have one whether you want it or not. And if you're not paying attention to it, probably not a good one. So it's really critical that we focus on the culture of our organization and try to affect it immediately. Because again, it goes back to harvesting 100% of the brains available to you. I think you can ask yourself every day when you walk into an organization, how much of that guy's brain, and this, I literally ask myself, how much of that guy's brain did I get? And if I don't even talk to that person and I have no formal mechanism to gather what they have in their head, I'm doing something wrong. So I think it is trying to get to ground truth and trying to dig into harvesting the entire organization.
And I love that. I love that. Do you want to follow up and issue a specific challenge, or are we going to leave it at that? Because that's pretty freaking awesome to go with.
I think that's it. I think it's
Phenomenal.
look at the organization and ask yourself, how do I affect the culture and what is the culture?
I love it. Jon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man, for talking with us and for everything that you're doing, both to create that neutral ground for teams and also to derive those lessons learned and to spread them out in the rest of the community. It's an honor to have you on.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you so much. I love what you do and I appreciate our friendship.
Love it, man. Love it. I'm going to end with our traditional disclaimer. Our job here in the Emergency Mind Project, as per Jon's previous comment, is to figure out the best of what other people have already figured out about applying knowledge under pressure and spread it around to the rest of the world. We don't do medical advice, and we only represent ourselves and not the companies that we worked with. All right. With all that, good luck out there.